Hello, my name is Tipper. Today I'm going to be talking about Appalachian language, specifically words and phrases that start with the letter G. If you're new to my channel, you've never seen one of my videos before, I have an entire playlist about Appalachian language. There's videos about sayings, there's lots of videos where we give examples so you can hear how the words are used in daily life in Appalachia. Lots of things for you to check out. If you're a regular viewer of my channel, welcome back. We're going to be using the Dictionary of Smoky Mountain English as a guide today. And we're going to start, the first word, the first entry we're going to talk about is gay-lacquer. So gay-lacquer is not a word that I was familiar with when I was growing up in Appalachia. It's one that I learned about over the years when I was researching and writing for the Blind Pig and the Acorn, my blog. But a gay-lacquer is one who gathers galax or other ornamental greens to sell to florists. 1957, Paris, my mountains. Now some 45 years later, Haynes is one of the top gay-lacquers in all the mountains, with a galax and evergreen factory here in Old Fort, from which he ships out thousands of pounds of galax leaves and other evergreens week in and week out during the year. So that was way back in 1957. So that was a lot of, he had a whole factory where he was a real gay-lacquer, in other words. Today, I don't know anyone who's a gay-lac or anyone that gathers galax or any other kind of thing like that to sell. I do know sang hunters, ginseng hunters. I know a few of those. But as far as the galax, I don't know. Now, if you know someone, please share a comment if you have experience or know someone who still gathers galax to sell to florists. So you may be wondering, if you've never heard of galax, what is galax? So that's the next entry. Galax is a common evergreen plant whose leaves are harvested for ornamental greenery and sold, especially during the holiday season. It's the same as beetleweed or colt's foot. Colt's foot. It does look like a horseshoe, kind of the shape of a horseshoe, of a horse print, in other words, horse hoof print. So galax grows throughout the southern highland of Appalachia, and probably throughout all of Appalachia, but especially in the area where I live. And if you've ever spent much time in the woods, you've definitely seen it. It's a very small plant, but it's green and evergreen. I mean, it stays green. It's a really shiny green. Almost, sometimes the shine will even make you think it doesn't look quite real. But you can see it's such a pretty little plant, how and why florists would want to use it. And that lovely green color especially, of course, fits in great with Christmas when you think about wreaths and Christmas decorations. So 1901, Losenberry Southern Wildflowers. To many that have ever seen the blossoms, the leaves are familiar, for the mountain people pick them by the million and tie them into little bunches of 100, each of which later are sent to a florist in different parts of the country. 1975, Lunsford it used to be. When you go pretty far back in the coves, there's a vocation that is peculiar to the high reaches of the Blue Ridge Mountains, and that's the gathering of an unusual plant called galax. There's a place up in Virginia, close to the North Carolina line, called Galax, Virginia. Following the Blue Ridge clear on through Mount Mitchell, on the higher elevations this plant is found. The old folk name for it would be colt's foot. The higher up you go into the Blue Ridge, the larger the leaves, and in colder weather and in the spring, they turn bronze. They're used for decorations and so on in many places. In the Blue Ridge section especially, they're gathered by mountaineers along with dog hobble and other evergreens and shipped. Many people have made fortunes in the gathering of galax. So wow, many people have made fortunes. Like I said, I don't know anyone that's ever hunted galax, but that's really interesting. So the next entry is galled, G-A-L-D, galled. It's a verb, to chafe, get blisters from chafing, or overwork, and by extension to insult. 1940, glossary, Aswell glossary, it's just that it was noted that it means galled means to chafe. This saddle has galled my mule raw. 1979, Walton War, galled was another expression used for completely worn out, irritated, or blistered. 1995, Montgomery collection, he galled me every time he preached, and that was Brown. So the Brown did not like whatever the preacher was preaching about. So galled is one that's very common in my area of Appalachia. So it would mean like to chafe. So maybe you had a new pair of shoes and they weren't broke in well and they galled your feet. Maybe you had wore your wet bathing suit too long, you know, after you got through swimming, and you kept wearing it and galded yourself, your skin, where it was rubbing that wet fabric, or got wet in the rain and something galded you. But also, as noted by Brown, in your emotions, you think about chafing your skin, but sometimes your emotions get chafed or galded. So that galded me, it made me mad, you know, so that one's still very common in my area of Appalachia. A galloping fence is a noun, a rail fence laid out in zigzag fashion, same as worm fence or zigzag fence. 1896 word list, galloping fence equals a fence made of rails stuck in the ground crisscross. So I'm sure you're familiar with the fences that they're talking about, the ones that kind of go back and forth. I've heard them called a zigzag, or a split rail fence, just that, or, and I've read the worm fence, I've never heard that, but I've never heard them called a galloping fence. So I love that entry though, because in my mind, that's what it looks like. Look, they're galloping across the field. So from now on, I'm going to think of that. Every time I see one of those fences, I'm going to think, it's a galloping fence, so I like that one a lot. The next one is gallus. Have you ever heard of a gallus? So your galluses. Gallus is, it says usually plural, but I would say to make the plural galluses. I'd put that ES on them. Anyway, a suspender to hold up a man's trousers. Also like your overalls, the things that buckle, so those are galluses. 1883, Ziegler and Crosscup, heart of Alleghenies, an unbleached linen shirt crossed by galluses which held his homespun pantaloons in place covered his body. That's probably how they said it. 1971, it was documented in Cocke County, Tennessee, Jefferson County, and Sevier County, Tennessee. 1973, the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, he didn't have a thing on but his galluses and his shoes. So hopefully he had something to hook his galluses to. 1982, so high, Mama bent to button the top button of Papa's one and only best shirt, then fastened the galluses to the bib of his overalls. I hope Papa hadn't died. I don't know why she'd have been bending over him to do that, or maybe he was sick. Maybe he couldn't do it. Anyway, so galluses, that's a very common one where I live. Your gallus is twisted right there. Fix it. I might say that to one of the girls if they had overalls on. Katie has some overalls. She hadn't worn them in a long time, though. I'll have to find out if she still has them. But so galluses, you'll have to tell me if you're familiar with that one. Galoot. A galoot is a noun, and it's a man, usually an older, foolish one. 1883, again from Ziegler and Crosscup. Hunter, said one, we're only too glad to see you, but at first we didn't know whether you were gentlemen or a sheriff's posse, the road boss, or revenue or galoots. So they were hoping they weren't revenue or galoots. 1976, Garber Mountainese, it means an old fool. The Salvation Army gave the old galoot food and a pallet to sleep on. 1998, Montgomery collection, it was known to Bush, Jones, Norris, and Oliver. He's as crazy as any old galoot. That was Cardwell, so galoot. You old galoot. That's one I've heard. I don't hear it very often, but I have heard that one used. So gap is the next one. Gap is a noun. A low place on a mountain ridge, a pass or a break through a ridge, used in place names as Newfound Gap, such as Newfound Gap and Low Gap. 1939 Hall Collection, Proctor, North Carolina. Bears generally cross over the highest knob they is within reach of them. They don't go through a gap like a deer. That was Dan Cable. 1956 Fink, that's why. That was the name of the book, that's why. Here's these lower places between peaks and along ridges are almost invariably known as gaps with an occasional swag. Swag is another term you'll hear. 1971, it was known in Cocke County, Tennessee. And then, let's see, 1972, Great Smoky Mountain National Park, Manning, McCarter lived in the gap of the mountain up there. So you'd hear that a lot. Up at the top, at the gap of the mountain up there, there's that big old hickory tree. That was 1980. Let's see, now I skipped one. 1973, Great Smoky Mountain National Park. Well, I got up here at the gap of the ridge, and I heard them down there whooping and hollering, and of course, it scared me. 1980, Campbell, Memories of Smoky. Low places along the main crest of the Smokies also provide some little bit of confusion for visitors, especially those from the western mountains and from New England. Here, those low places are designated as gaps. In the west, they are passes, and in New England, they are notches. 1982, Blue Ridge. In the terminology of the mountain people, a gap is a low place in the mountains, a dip in the ridge. In other parts of the world, it might be called a pass or a notch. But in the southern highlands, it's a gap. These were the places the mountains could be crossed most easily. Indians, settlers, and the wild game all came through the gaps. So gaps is that, using that term in relation to mountains or locations, is still very common where I live. Just up this way, back there behind me, is the Coleman Gap. And when I was little, I had one of my best friends. I don't even really remember not knowing her, but she lived in Pine Log, which is just over through the Coleman Gap, over the mountain through the gap there. And for us to get to go home with each other, somebody had to drive. Like if, I want to go over to Tracy's house, or she wanted to come over to my house, somebody had to drive. Well, if you leave Brasstown, leave my house, you have to go down through Brasstown, then around, and then up through Pine Log to reach her house. So when we were small, we used to really wish that there was just a road straight from here through the mountain, through the Coleman Gap, because then it would have just been right down the road. You know, it would have took less begging and pleading to get to go home with each other or get to go visit each other. So when I think about the Coleman Gap, that's the gap I think about most. I think about my friend Tracy. Gape. Gape is a verb. To gasp, have difficulty breathing. 1940, Hans Hawks Dunn. She kept on gaping for breath. 1966, it was documented in Burnsville, North Carolina. And then 1994, documented Montgomery collection, Brown, Letford, Shields, and Weaver knew it. So gape. I've heard that one, gaping. He was gaping for breath. He run all the way up here and he was gaping. Also in relation to fish, like sometimes if you catch fish and you get it out of the water, you know, before they expire, before they die, and their gills are gone, that's like they're gaping. They're gaping for air, because they're gaping for their water. They want to be back in the water because they are in the air. So that I've heard that fish doing that is gape. I'll be interested to know if you're familiar with that one. This next one is garb. So garb is a noun, but the variant form of it is one where and I've never heard anybody, I've heard people say garb, but not this part. A lot of times in Appalachia we add letters to places, and one of the ones that we'll add sometimes is a Y in between. So instead of garb, it's gyarb, like they put a G-Y-A-R-B, gyarb. So that's the variant form. So it's clothes. It's what garb is. Garb is your clothes, what you're wearing. 1939, Hall Collection, Jefferson City, Tennessee. He was dressed in an awful garb. They put the Y there, garb. That was Robert Ray. 1938, Sims Collection. Why, they'd allowed us as well as churched us if we'd have gone about in such garbs. They were talking about shorts and bathing suits. So that was somebody saying they would have lauded us or churched us if we had went around in such garb, talking about wearing shorts. You know, in days gone by, women or men, either one, really didn't wear shorts, but so they were talking about that. I left this part out, so let me read it again. Why, they'd allowed us as well as churched us if we'd have gone about in such garbs as they now shamelessly strut about in Gatlinburg. So that one's interesting. Another one right after that one, talking again about the Y, is garden. Well, of course, you know what a garden is, but sometimes in Appalachia you'll hear that Y put in there, so it's a garden instead of just a garden, a garden. So Edison and Fairchild, Tennessee mountains, they's the lastingest blossoms in the garden. I wish I knew what they were talking about. 1913, Capehart, our Southern Highlanders, the Hillmen insert sounds where they do not belong. Sometimes it is only an added consonant, like garden, across, corcus. Sometimes a syllable, loaferer, musicaneerer, suddenty. So he was just describing some of the unusual language that he had heard in the southern Appalachia. 1939, Walker, mountaineer, looks. Only a few mountaineers say kyar for car and gyarden for garden, but it would be an impossibility for most of them to pronounce cow any other way than kyow, or care any other way than kier or kier. So today, that was 1939, so that's been a long time ago. Today, you would not really hear any of those. You might still hear the kier, that part. That would be the holdover, I would say. But let me know where you live if you're familiar with any of those. 1942, Hall phonetics. After K and G, many elderly people and a few others use a glide as in card or garden, kyard or garden. So that's just documenting the, describing what that technically, I guess, is called. Staying on the garden theme, garden salad or garden salad, got to put that T on there, or garden sass. That's a noun, and that means fresh garden vegetables, but especially greens. When you think about lettuce and mustard and collards and those kind of things, kale, usually eaten in the spring, same as salad. 1936, garden sass, that was known in Swain County, North Carolina. 1937, Hall collection, Cosby Creek, Tennessee, equals garden sass. They were familiar with it. Vegetables in general, it says. That was Mrs. William Ball. 1944, Wilson Word List, garden sass equals vegetables. 1957, Hall collection, Del Rio, Tennessee. The expression garden sass was usually preferred to garden salad. Salad with a T. That was Louisa Metcalf. 1972, Cooper, North Carolina Mountain Folklore. Along with wild meat, honey ramps, and branch lettuce, it requires only a little garden sass and store-bought food to satisfy nourishment for the body. That's good eating. In the summer when the stuff's coming in from the garden, it's the best eating of the year for sure. So that was garden sass, garden salad, or garden sass, or garden salad with the T. One more garden one for you is garden stuff or garden truck, and that's a noun, and that means garden vegetables. 1939 Hall collection, Cataloochee, North Carolina. We have to buy our peaches and stuff that way while we make our garden stuff we eat each year. So in Cataloochee, they probably couldn't grow peaches, so they bought them, but they made the rest of the garden stuff, they're just calling it stuff, they grew theirself. And then in the sugar lands of Tennessee, we just make a little crop of a summer, raised what potatoes and garden stuff we could get along with. So they're just calling it garden stuff or garden truck. I've heard both of those. Probably garden stuff is the one that still would be most common today, but I don't even really know that that's unusual because it's just garden stuff. I don't know, that would make sense to me. So there's no way that I could leave the G's without talking about one of the most common, when people talk about Appalachian language and they talk about unusual words, one that will almost always be in the mix is gom. If talking about making a gom, making a mess, that's one that's really common when you hear people talk about it, and they have a lot of memories, and people are still using it. It's very common in the area of Appalachia that I live in today. So a gom, well, variant forms are gom, it's hard for me to say, gom, one's with, I should just spell them because I can't say it, but gom. So one of the variants is G-A-U-M, one of them is G-O-M, and the other one is G-O-R-M, gorm. I've never heard anyone say gorm, but gom, I would say both those the same because that's how I talk. Those are still really common. So it's a noun, a mess, a state of disarray, usually one that is sticky or dirty. 1904, Capehart, I can't leave everything in a gom. 1927, Mason, Lure of Smokies. The pie is a conglomeration, that's a great word, a momic or a gom. To use mountain terms of boiled dough and either apples or peaches with no sugar. So they're saying a momic is another word to use for making a mess too. So they're saying that's just a mess. Who would make a pie and not put sugar in it? 1995, Adams, Come Go Home. He's been gone from this world a long time, and if we tried to move him, it'd just be a big gom, what with the coffin all rotted and him spilling out of the holes. So, I have no idea why they'd be wanting to move him. Maybe a highway was going to go through there, or maybe something like that. But yeah, I don't know. They were talking about digging somebody up though and moving the body, and it would be a gom. I'm sure it certainly would be. The word gom can also be used, the dictionary notes, as a verb, as in you're making a gom or gomming something up. You're gomming something up. So to smear, make sticky, muddy, dirty, or greasy. To disarrange, make untidy. So 1895, Edison and Fairchild, Tennessee mountains, gommed up equals covered with litter. 1913, again from Capehart, if the house be in disorder, it is said to be all gormed or gommed up. All gormed or gommed up. 1921, Campbell, Southern Highlanders, if we recall provincial English, we understand the mother who apologizes for the smeared condition of the baby's face when she says it is all gormed up. So that one's interesting. 1945, Hans, Hawks Dunn, the porch is done and gormed up. 1960, Cooper, Jewlarker, the drunkard gommed up his life, his family's life. So he didn't just gom up, like make a mess with something. He gommed up his very life by being a drunkard and ruined his family's life. So that one's really common where I live. When Corey and Katie was little, they were the two gommiest kids you ever met. They wanted to make a gom out of everything. One time they got into my flour in the kitchen. Before I could stop them, they had it everywhere. They just gommed flour all over the kitchen and all over themselves. I have a picture of them. They're like little toddlers, and they thought it was fun till it started getting on their eyes and in their face and in their hair. And then they started seeing each other, and I think that scared them once they seen that each other was white, you know. Anyway, they loved to make a gom with mud. They made mud pies a lot. When they were really probably, 8, 9, 10 years old, and they would spend a lot of time with Granny and Pap, and their cousin, my niece April, she would also be with them, and they would be gomming outside at Granny and Pap's, making a mess with something. They'd come in to eat dinner, and they'd make them go to the bathroom to wash their hands. Well, one day Pap caught on to the fact that they'd go in there and they'd turn the water on, but they wouldn't actually wash their hands. So Granny would tell them, after that, well, go in there and wash your hands up, wash up for dinner, but don't be in there gomming and messing, really wash your hands, So that's just really common here and really still common in a lot of other areas too. I know, because that's one of those words, like I said, that anytime someone's talking about Appalachian language, gom almost always comes up. Our next one is gather up, and gather up is a verb phrase to assemble, round up as before or after a hunt. So 1939 Hall Collection, 9 Mile Creek, well, a passel of us fellers gathered up here to bear hunt. We all gathered up and we come down into what's called Cade's Cove, and that was Fawn's Cable that said that. Cataloochee, North Carolina, well, when we got the bear killed, we wanted to get all our men all together. We fired our guns for signals to gather them up. Will Palmer said that one. 1954, Great Smoky Mountain National Park. A corn shucking is where people gathers up and shucks corn in the fall when they get the corn gathered. 1960, Mason's memoir. On Christmas Eve night, it was customary for a group of young men to gather up and go serenading. 1973, Great Smoky Mountain National Park, they would gather up on Sunday or something like that and sit and talk. And then 1995, Adams Come Go Home. The next day, all the men gathered up and went back to see if they could find anything. So gathered up is still really common where I live, and that's one of those phrases I really love, because if you're gathering up together, makes you think of community, makes you think of family. On Thanksgiving, we gather up together. Used to be always at Pap and Granny's. The past few years it's been at my house. So we gather up together as a family, and sometimes we have extras, friends that didn't have anywhere to go and those kind of things. But we gather up together and eat and fellowship. Of course, you gather up together at church. You gather up together at the community center and maybe support whatever's going on in your community. So that's one that just really speaks to me and speaks to the hospitality, I guess, of Appalachia. Well, I enjoy thinking about it in relation to you, because what are we doing? We're gathering up, albeit virtually. It's not in person, of course. So even though it's virtually, we are gathering up. We're gathering up to talk about Appalachian language, for you to gather up with me and celebrate those great things, whether it's the language, the food, the culture, the hospitality, all the landscape, the beauty that we're surrounded by in Appalachia. So I really appreciate you gathering up with me, and I sure hope that you continue to do that and continue to help me celebrate Appalachia.